When the cab turned down the quiet street I'd memorized since childhood, I thought I'd feel peace. The kind of peace that hums through your body when you know you're home again. Instead, I felt an eerie stillness, too perfect, too silent, like the air was holding its breath. From the back seat, I could see our house at the end of the cul-de-sac, its white shutters catching the gold of the Texas sunset. For a fleeting moment, everything looked the same. But when the car rolled to a stop, I saw it. Something that didn't belong. A red sold sign, tilted slightly in the dying light, planted like a warning in the front yard. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe the realtor next door had accidentally stuck their sign in the wrong lawn. I even laughed under my breath, the sound thin and nervous. But the closer I walked, the more the wrongness multiplied. The flower beds my mom used to fuss over were dry and brittle, their soil cracked open like a wound. The curtains were gone. The porch light, which used to flicker with a comforting hum, had been ripped from its socket. And then, right at the foot of the steps, I saw them. Boxes. My boxes. They were stacked in uneven towers, duct-taped shut, marked in my mother's handwriting. Emily's clothes, books, desk, Miska. One of the flaps had caved in, spilling out a sweater I'd worn to my high school graduation. It lay half in shadow, half in the harsh evening light, like something abandoned and ashamed. I remember the sound of the car driving away behind me, the driver's confusion as he asked if I was sure this was the right address. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because pinned to the front door, fluttering lazily in the breeze, was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, looping, precise, careful. The kind of handwriting that once signed permission slips and birthday cards. It said only 8 words. We had to move fast. Handle it yourself, Mom. That was the moment my world tilted. Sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. Because what happened next would change the way I understood family, love, and what it truly means to be alone. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Every comment and subscription keeps this channel alive, and I promise you'll want to hear how this one ends. Hours earlier, I'd been a normal college student on summer break, staring out the airplane window as Manhattan disappeared beneath a curtain of clouds. I was 23, a data security major at Columbia University, exhausted but exhilarated. Finals had been brutal. 3 all-nighters, endless caffeine, code that blurred into gibberish, but I was finally done. I'd survived. All through that flight, I'd imagined walking through the teal door of our home in Austin, Texas, kicking off my sneakers, hearing my dad shout from the kitchen, "Hey, kiddo, you made it." I'd spent years in New York's relentless rhythm, but home was supposed to be safe, steady, unchanging. I'd even brought gifts. A hand-painted picture frame I'd picked up at a flea market near Union Square, and a small box of chocolates wrapped in gold foil. I'd written for Mom on a sticky note and stuck it to the frame. I thought she'd laugh, maybe tear up, the way she always did when I remembered small things. But now, standing on that driveway, holding that note in my trembling hands, the story I'd told myself about my life disintegrated. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I unlocked it and stared at my mother's contact photo, the one from 2 summers ago, where she stood on that same porch, sunlight catching the streaks of gray in her hair. It looked like a stranger. I hit call. "Mom?" My voice cracked. "I'm standing in front of our house, and what's going on? Why are my things outside? Why is there a sold sign?" A sigh. Long, slow, irritated. "Emily, honey, I can't do this right now. The market was good. We had to sell quickly. We're already in Florida." "Florida?" I repeated. "What? When? Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice sharpened, a tone I hadn't heard since childhood scoldings. "You're an adult now. You don't need to depend on us for every little thing. You'll figure it out." "Figure it out?" My throat went dry. "Where am I supposed to sleep tonight?" Another sigh. Then flatly, "That's not our responsibility anymore." The call ended. Just like that. For a long time I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence where her voice had been. Somewhere behind me, a door opened. One of the neighbors watching, curious but unwilling to step closer. I could almost hear their thoughts. What happened? Why is she sitting there on the curb? I dragged one of the boxes to the shade and sat down. The sun was dropping behind the trees, and the heat felt like it was pressing me into the concrete. I kept staring at the empty house, trying to make sense of it, trying to rewind time just a few hours, a few days, a few decisions. Had I missed signs? Did I ignore a hint in my mother's last text? We've been thinking about a big change that I brushed off as talk? Or was this who they'd always been, and I'd just never seen it before? The questions spiraled faster than I could catch them. A small, ironic thought surfaced, almost absurd in its simplicity. For someone trained to protect people from cyber threats, I'd never imagined I'd have to protect myself from my own family. The irony burned. I pulled my phone out again, opened my contacts, and hovered over my father's name. The photo was from last Thanksgiving, him grinning in front of the smoker, apron dusted with seasoning, one hand holding tongues, the other raised in mock protest because I'd snapped a picture mid-sentence. I hit call. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Mark Carter," the recorded voice said. "Leave a message." I didn't. I couldn't. The sun slipped below the rooftops, and for the first time in my life, I realized how fast safety can vanish. One day, you're coming home to rest, and the next, you're realizing there's no home left. That's the thing about family stories. We think we know our roles. The loving daughter, the proud parents, the safe place waiting at the end of every semester. But sometimes those stories are rewritten without your permission. Sometimes they leave you standing on a driveway surrounded by boxes, holding a note that says, "Handle it yourself." And maybe that's when the real story begins. Not the one you thought you were living, but the one where you find out what you're made of when every safety net disappears. I didn't know it then, but that day was the beginning of the most painful, liberating transformation of my life. I wish I could tell you that I cried or screamed or begged for answers, but I didn't. I just picked up the smallest box, the one labeled MISC, and carried it to the curb. It felt symbolic somehow, as if moving it would stop the trembling in my hands. Inside were random scraps, a cracked phone case, an old planner, a graduation tassel. My whole history, reduced to clutter. I looked up at the house one last time. The walls that used to echo laughter now looked like a stranger's, hollow and cold. And beneath the exhaustion and disbelief, something else stirred, a sharp, cold flicker of resolve. If they could erase me that easily, I would rebuild myself from nothing. If I had to handle it alone, I would. Because somewhere, deep beneath the hurt, I already knew this. Their abandonment wasn't the end of my story. It was the first chapter. Now, let me ask you something. If you came home one day and found everything you owned sitting in boxes on the driveway with nothing but a note that said, "Handle it yourself," what would you do? A. Call your parents and beg for an explanation. B. Take the boxes, walk away, and never look back. Drop your answer, A or B, in the comments below. I'd love to know what you would do. The Texas air was thick enough to taste. It clung to my skin, sticky and heavy, as I stood in front of what used to be my house. The smell of dust and dying grass filled the silence between heartbeats. My hands hung uselessly at my sides, and for a long time, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The cab's engine faded down the street until the only sound left was the soft rustle of cardboard rubbing against cardboard in the breeze. The boxes looked like strangers, foreign objects dumped in a place that should have been familiar. The handwriting on them was so distinctly my mother's that it hurt to look at. I could almost see her at the kitchen counter, pen in hand, labeling things neatly before every holiday. Only this time, she hadn't been organizing for Christmas or Thanksgiving. She'd been packing away her daughter. Emily, clothes, books, desk drawer, Miska. My life cataloged like items in a garage sale. I sank to my knees and touched the nearest box, the tape already curling at the edges from the heat. Beneath my fingers, the cardboard felt hot, almost alive, pulsing faintly, as if holding on to all the moments it once witnessed. Birthday presents unwrapped in that living room. The smell of cinnamon rolls on Saturday mornings. My father humming along to old country songs while mowing the lawn. The memories hit like body blows, each one a reminder that they'd all been sold off with the house. The note still trembled in my hand. We had to move fast. Handle it yourself. Mom. 8 words. I'd always believed you could tell who a person really was by what they said when they didn't have time to think. Those 8 words told me everything I hadn't wanted to know. A car drove past slowly, the driver craning their neck to see what I was doing. The neighborhood that used to wave to me every morning now stared like I was some kind of spectacle. A girl left behind by her own family. Shame crawled up my spine. I wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. I pulled out my phone again, even though I knew it wouldn't make a difference. The screen's reflection caught my face, sweat, confusion, mascara smudged by heat. I dialed my mother one more time, straight to voicemail. I tried my father. Same thing. I listened to his recorded greeting, cheerful and outdated. "Hey, this is Mark Carter. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." The cruelty of it stung. I almost left a message. "You forgot me," I wanted to say. "You left me standing in the ruins of my childhood." But I didn't. Instead, I sat back on the curb, watching the sun sink behind the rooftops. The air shimmered. A sprinkler in a neighbor's yard ticked rhythmically, a sound that used to comfort me. Now it felt mocking. I wanted to scream, to cry, to knock on every door until someone told me this was some elaborate mistake. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't. My parents weren't the type to make mistakes. They were planners. Precise. Deliberate. If they'd sold the house, it wasn't because they had to. It was because they wanted to. The heaviness in my chest wasn't just heartbreak. It was betrayal. Realizing that the people who'd once tucked me into bed and whispered "I love you," Pumpkin had deliberately erased me from their lives, made my stomach turn. Every family photo I'd ever taken, every secret shared, every promise, they'd all been traded for something else. Something I wasn't a part of. I opened one of the boxes just to prove to myself that this was real. Inside were my books, textbooks from Columbia, dog-eared copies of To Kill a Mockingbird and The Art of Deception. I pulled one out, and a small Polaroid fluttered to the ground. It was of me and my parents at the Barton Springs picnic we'd taken right before I left for college. My mother's smile was wide and real. My father had his arm around both of us. I remember that day clearly, the sun, the laughter, the smell of grilled corn. I had no idea it would be the last time we'd ever take a photo together. I put the picture back and closed the box. The sky was turning violet now, streaks of orange fading into deep blue. I could hear cicadas starting up their nightly chorus, relentless and alive, reminding me that the world was still turning even if mine had stopped. The first tear slipped down before I could stop it. I wiped it away angrily. Crying wouldn't solve anything. My mom's words echoed in my head, cruel in their simplicity. "You'll figure it out." I hated how certain she'd sounded. Like I was an equation she'd already solved. Like I was someone she no longer needed to worry about because the solution was already written in permanent ink. A light flicked on in the house next door. Mrs. Daniels, our elderly neighbor, stepped onto her porch. "Emily?" she called, squinting through the fading light. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" Her voice nearly broke me. But pride is a dangerous thing. I stood quickly, brushing dirt from my jeans. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just picking up a few things." She looked at the boxes and the note in my hand, her expression softening. She wanted to ask more, I could tell, but instead she nodded and went back inside. I was grateful. The last thing I needed was pity. I stared at the house again, memorizing it one last time. The chipped paint on the shutters, the porch swing my dad built for my 16th birthday, the faint outline on the wall where our family name used to hang in big wooden letters, the Carters. It was gone now, probably taken down and packed away in someone else's moving truck. For a moment, I wondered where my parents were. Were they unpacking in some beachside condo, drinking wine on a balcony, pretending I never existed? Did they tell their new neighbors about their daughter in New York? Or did they edit that part out of their story entirely? The question stung because I already knew the answer. They'd moved on. Cleanly, efficiently, the way my mother always handled everything. The night deepened. The cicadas grew louder. My stomach twisted from hunger, but I didn't dare leave the boxes alone. They felt like the last fragile proof that I'd once belonged here. I pulled my phone from my pocket again and scrolled aimlessly through messages. Old texts from my mom about grocery lists, reminders about paying rent, a string of heart emojis she'd sent me months ago when I told her about my internship offer. It all looked fake now, like messages from a stranger who'd borrowed my mother's number. At some point, I stopped scrolling. My thumb hovered over one contact, Tessa Nguyen. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe a year. But I remembered her voice, her easy laughter, the way she'd once told me, "You always act like you have to carry the world alone. Maybe try letting someone help." At the time, I'd brushed it off. Tonight, those words felt like a lifeline. I pressed call. When she picked up, I didn't even try to explain. "Tessa," I whispered. I don't know where to go." Her answer came instantly, steady and warm. "Then come here." Something inside me cracked open at those 3 words. After hours of silence, there was finally a sound that meant safety. Not the kind I'd lost, but maybe the kind I could build again. I looked at the dark outline of my old house one last time. It didn't feel like home anymore. Maybe it never really had. Then I picked up one of the boxes, light enough to carry, and started walking toward the streetlights, away from the driveway, away from everything I thought I knew. The night air wrapped around me like a strange kind of mercy. I didn't realize it then, but that was the first time I took a step toward the life that was truly mine. The phone felt heavier than it should have, as if it knew the weight of what I was about to hear. The afternoon sun had slid behind the trees, leaving the sky a soft, bruised orange. I was still sitting on the curb, my legs folded against the heat of the concrete, surrounded by pieces of my life taped into boxes. I'd stared at that note. "We had to move fast. Handle it yourself," until the words blurred into one another. My pulse thudded so loudly I could hear it echo in my ears. I'd already called twice, both to voicemail, but something inside me refused to stop trying. You don't just stop being someone's daughter overnight. You still reach for the person who's supposed to catch you, even when you know they won't. When my mother finally answered, the sound of her voice didn't feel real. "Emily?" she said. Her tone was clipped, impatient, as though I'd interrupted something important. For one stupid, hopeful second, I almost thought she might say she was sorry, that it was all some misunderstanding. Instead, I heard the clatter of dishes in the background, the murmur of a television, and her sigh of mild annoyance. "I can't talk long, sweetie. We're busy settling in." I forced my voice to stay calm. "Settling in where?" "In Florida," she said, like it was obvious. The move was quick. We didn't have time to go through everything. The words hit me like a punch. I looked around at the boxes littering the driveway, my books half spilling from one, an old sweater hanging out of another. "You mean here? You sold the house? You moved? Without telling me?" She hesitated for half a second, then said briskly, "Yes. The market was strong. We had an offer we couldn't pass up. Your father's arthritis has been terrible lately, and the humidity here helps." Her voice was calm, practical, like she was explaining a grocery list. I stared at the phone, trying to reconcile that tone with the mother I thought I knew. The one who used to kiss my forehead before every exam, who texted me reminders to eat when I was buried in work. "You couldn't pass it up?" I whispered. "You couldn't even call me." "Oh, Emily," she said, with a sigh that dripped irritation instead of guilt. "You're overreacting. You're 23. You're supposed to be independent by now. Most kids your age already have their own place." "I did have a place," I said, my voice rising despite my effort to hold it steady. "This was my home. You didn't just sell a house. You sold my house, and you left me on the street." Her tone hardened. "Don't be dramatic. All your things are safe. We boxed them up for you, didn't we?" I pressed my palm against my forehead, dizzy from the absurdity. "Safe? They're sitting outside, Mom, in the heat. Anyone could just—" I cut myself off. "Where are you right now?" "Tampa," she said simply. I could hear the ocean in the background, the muffled chatter of strangers. "It's beautiful here, Em. You'd like it. Palm trees, sunlight every day." I closed my eyes. "You're sitting in Florida, talking about palm trees, while I'm standing in front of a house you sold without telling me." "Listen," she said, the edge in her voice sharpening. "You need to start handling things like an adult. You've always been good at solving problems. You'll figure something out." Something inside me cracked. "You threw me away like garbage," I said quietly. "How could you do that to your daughter?" "Oh, for heaven's sake, Emily," she snapped. "You're acting like a child. We raised you for over 20 years. We gave you everything. Now it's time for you to stand on your own. We didn't owe you a lifetime of hand-holding." I felt my throat tighten. "You owed me a goodbye." For the first time, she went silent. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd soften. But when she spoke again, her voice was colder than ever. "You'll thank us someday," she said. This will make you stronger. I almost laughed, but it came out as a choke. You really think this is strength? Abandoning your child without a word? Enough, she said sharply. I don't have time for this. We're meeting with a realtor about a property we might buy. She paused, her tone lowering just slightly, almost as if she wanted the last word to sound like wisdom. It's time you grew up, Emily. You're resourceful. You'll manage. And then the line went dead. The silence that followed was absolute. No static, no lingering hum, just the sound of the world resuming around me. Cicadas, distant cars, a dog barking down the block. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the black screen until I saw my reflection, sunburned, hollow-eyed, small. For a long minute, I just sat there. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I think I was too stunned to do either. I thought of my father then. He'd been quiet during the call. I hadn't heard his voice, just the faint shuffle in the background. My dad, the one who used to cheer the loudest at my robotics competitions, who once stayed up until 3 a.m. helping me fix a project that had crashed before my senior presentation. I tried calling him, clinging to the hope that maybe he'd have an explanation, something that made this nightmare logical. Voicemail. His recorded voice was cheerful, the same one from years ago. Hey, this is Mark Carter. Leave a message. I didn't, because what could I say? Hey, Dad, thanks for the boxes on the driveway. Hope Florida's great. The sun dipped lower, painting long shadows across the pavement. My body felt drained, hollowed out. I leaned back against the nearest box and stared at the place that used to be my whole world. I thought about every little thing I'd taken for granted. The smell of my dad's barbecue sauce on Sunday afternoons, my mother's voice floating through the kitchen, the familiar creak of the hallway floorboards when someone walked to the fridge at midnight. All gone. Sold. Deleted like old files on a hard drive. What haunted me wasn't just the loss of the house, it was the realization that my parents hadn't hesitated. There had been no moment of doubt, no trace of remorse in her voice, just the cool efficiency of someone closing a chapter they no longer cared to reread. I sat there until dusk gave way to full darkness, until the sky turned black and the first streetlights flickered on. Every passing car's headlights flashed across my boxes, making them glow for a moment before plunging back into shadow. I wanted to believe there had to be a reason, a debt, an emergency, something that forced their hand. But my gut knew better. This wasn't desperation. It was choice. When my phone buzzed again, my heart leapt before I even checked the screen. But it wasn't my mother. It was Tessa. She'd seen my missed call from earlier and texted, "You okay? What's going on?" I stared at her message, trying to find words. Finally, I typed, "Can I stay with you tonight? I'll explain later." Her reply came instantly. "Of course, come now." The relief that swept through me was raw and terrifying. For hours, I'd been sitting in a graveyard of everything I'd ever called home. And now, for the first time since I'd stepped off that plane, someone had reminded me that I wasn't entirely alone. I stood slowly, my legs trembling, and looked at the house one last time. The porch light flickered to life automatically, triggered by the motion sensor, casting a faint glow over the "sold" sign. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house still remembered how to welcome someone home. It just wasn't me anymore. As I turned toward the street, my phone slipped in my sweaty hand. I caught it before it hit the pavement, gripping it tight. It wasn't just a device now. It was the last thread tethering me to two people who had decided they were done being parents. I considered throwing it into the yard, letting the grass swallow it whole. But instead, I slipped it back into my pocket. I wasn't ready to erase them completely. Not yet. As I started walking, the night air cooled against my skin, and the city lights flickered faintly on the horizon. I didn't know where I was going beyond Tessa's address. I just knew that wherever I ended up, it had to be somewhere that didn't look like this. Somewhere that didn't sound like my mother's voice saying, "You'll figure it out." Because in that moment, I realized I would. But not for the reasons she thought. The first thing I noticed about Tessa's apartment was the light. It spilled through the window in thin, golden lines that painted the cracked tile floor. The place smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. There was a chipped mug on the counter and a pile of unfolded clothes on the couch where I would sleep that night. It was small, cluttered, real, and it felt like a miracle. Tessa opened the door before I even knocked. Her dark hair was tied in a messy bun, her apron still on from the cafe. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at my swollen eyes, the grime on my hands, the exhaustion clinging to my skin, and then pulled me into a hug so tight I finally let myself breathe. "You're staying here," she said, not as an offer, but as a decision already made. That night, she made instant ramen with a boiled egg dropped in, the way she always used to when we were broke college kids pulling all-nighters. We sat cross-legged on the floor because she didn't own a dining table, and she pushed a chipped bowl toward me. I hadn't eaten since the flight, but the moment the broth hit my tongue, I felt something unclench inside my chest. I didn't realize until then how starving I'd been. For food? Yes, but also for kindness. "I don't even know what to say," I whispered. Tessa leaned back against the couch and studied me. "Then don't say anything tonight. Sleep. Tomorrow, we'll figure it out." The next morning, I woke to the smell of espresso. Tessa was already dressed for work, her hair twisted into a tight braid. She handed me a mug and said, "You're coming with me." The cafe sat on a corner downtown, wedged between a record store and a dry cleaner. It was small and perpetually humming, grinders whirring, milk steaming, soft chatter blending with the old jazz playing through the speakers. The place had the kind of energy that felt alive, forgiving. She introduced me to her manager, a wiry man named Diego with kind eyes. "She's a friend," Tessa said simply. "She needs some hours." He nodded once. "We always need help. Can you work the register?" That's how my new life began, quietly, with the rhythmic hiss of espresso machines and the clink of cups. It wasn't glamorous. The first few weeks, I lived out of a duffel bag at Tessa's apartment, my boxes still piled in her hallway like evidence of another life. I showered at odd hours and kept my clothes folded on the floor beside the couch. Every night, I told myself it was temporary. 2 weeks, maybe 3. But the days kept slipping by, and I realized I wasn't ready to move yet. Not until I could stop feeling like a ghost haunting the ruins of her own life. The routine helped. Morning shifts at the cafe, afternoon hours on my laptop finishing coursework for Columbia. I didn't have the mental space to dwell on the why of what my parents had done. Survival demanded focus, pay rent, finish projects, get through the day. But grief has a way of sneaking into the quiet moments. It found me during closing shifts, when the shop emptied and the machines cooled. I'd wipe down tables long after there was nothing left to clean, my mind looping through old memories. The smell of my father's barbecue smoke drifting through summer evenings, the sound of my mother humming along to Fleetwood Mac while folding laundry. For years, those small things had meant love. Now they were ghosts I couldn't exorcise. One night, after a long shift, Tessa found me sitting in the darkened cafe, staring out the window at the streetlights. "You're thinking again," she said softly. I gave a half laugh. "Seems like that's all I do lately." She sat across from me. "You can talk about them, you know." "I don't want to give them space in my head," I said, though it wasn't entirely true. The truth was, I didn't know how to talk about them without breaking apart. Tessa rested her chin in her hand. "You know what I think? You're afraid if you stop being angry, the pain will swallow you instead." I stared at her. "Maybe you should have majored in psychology instead of graphic design." She grinned. "Nah, I just know what it's like to rebuild from nothing." That was the first time she told me her own story. How she dropped out of college after her dad's heart attack. How she'd been working double shifts ever since. "You figure it out one day at a time," she said. Until one day, you look around and realize you're okay. After that, we built a rhythm. She worked mornings, I took the afternoon shifts. We shared leftovers, took late-night walks to the food truck park, sometimes sat in silence, watching people drift by under the neon lights. There was something healing about her steadiness, the way she didn't try to fix me. She just stayed. On weekends, I started helping her with small website projects. I still had my laptop, my lifeline to the world I was trying to reclaim. A cafe owner down the street needed help setting up an online ordering system. A local yoga studio wanted to secure their client database. The first time someone paid me directly for a small job, it felt like air filling my lungs again. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to move. But rebuilding isn't a straight line. Some nights, I'd wake up from dreams where my mother's voice called my name, and for a split second, I'd forget everything. I'd reach for my phone before remembering she wasn't someone I could call anymore. Other nights, Tessa would find me scrolling through old family photos, frozen between nostalgia and rage. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, she saw me staring at a picture of the three of us, my parents and me, standing in front of that teal door. My dad had one arm slung around my shoulders, my mom mid-laugh. The sunlight had caught her hair just right, and she looked happy. Real. You should keep that, Tessa said gently. I frowned. Why? It hurts to look at it. Because it's proof that once you had something good. It doesn't erase what they did, but it reminds you that not everything was fake. That version of them existed even if it didn't last. I didn't answer, but I slid the photo back into my wallet. Later that night, I found myself staring at it again, tracing the outline of their smiles. She was right. Holding on to that photo wasn't weakness, it was honesty. As weeks turned into months, the ache dulled just enough for me to breathe without flinching. I started saving every dollar I could. I stopped checking my parents' numbers, even out of habit. The silence from them was total, and strangely, it started to feel like peace. Still, sometimes I'd catch myself glancing at the teal ceramic mug I'd bought for my mom, the one that now sat on Tessa's counter holding pens. World's best mom. The paint had chipped on the rim, a small fracture that somehow made it more fitting. Every time I saw it, it reminded me that love could be both true and temporary. By the end of that summer, I was different. Harder, maybe, but also clearer. I'd learned that family wasn't about blood. It was about who stayed when everything else fell apart. And Tessa, with her chipped mugs and quiet strength, had become the closest thing to family I had left. On the last night before I moved out, we sat on her tiny balcony, sharing a cheap bottle of wine and watching the city hum below. "What are you going to do next?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I know I'm not going back." She nodded, then smiled, raising her glass. "To new beginnings." I clinked mine against hers, feeling the faint sting of hope rise in my chest. Maybe that was what rebuilding really meant, not erasing the ruins, but learning how to live beside them, one small act of courage at a time. It was one of those Texas mornings when the air already felt warm before the sun had fully risen. The cafe was half awake, the smell of espresso heavy in the air, and I was trying to focus on wiping down tables instead of thinking about the latest assignment waiting on my laptop. That was when Brandon, our delivery guy with a talent for finding gossip online, called across the counter. "Hey, Emily, isn't this your dad?" The sound of his voice didn't register at first. I looked up, squinting as he held out his phone. "What?" He turned the screen toward me. A grainy photo filled the display. A group of people standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a building, smiling for a local community board page. The caption read, "Dallas Neighborhood Planning Committee meeting, May 15th. My heart stuttered when my eyes found him. Third row, right side, familiar even through the blur. My father, Mark Carter. I laughed at first, a disbelieving, fragile laugh. "That can't be," I said. "They moved to Florida." Brandon frowned. "Well, this was 3 days before you said you came home, right?" My pulse began to thrum in my ears. I snatched the phone from him, zooming in. The photo quality was terrible, but I would have known that slouch anywhere. The way he leaned slightly to the right, his hands tucked in his pockets like he was trying not to draw attention. He was wearing the same brown leather jacket he'd had for years. There was no mistaking him. I tried to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. "3 days before," I whispered. "Hey, if it's too weird, I can—" "No, it's fine," I cut in, but my voice was shaking. I handed the phone back and walked out the back door into the alley, the smell of roasted beans replaced by the hot staleness of asphalt. The photo burned in my mind, each pixel a betrayal. If my dad had been in Dallas 3 days before I came home, then they hadn't moved suddenly. They hadn't been desperate or rushed. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. They'd packed my life into boxes, knowing I was coming home, knowing I'd find it that way. The realization hit like a second wave of abandonment, sharper, more personal. It wasn't just that they'd left me. It was that they'd chosen the timing, chosen the silence. I leaned against the brick wall, staring at the sunlit street beyond the alley. Cars passed, people laughed, the city moved on as though nothing in the world had changed. But everything in mine had. By the time my shift ended, I couldn't stop replaying the photo in my head. It was a loop I couldn't escape. The date stamp, the forced smiles, my father's face caught mid-expression. Every time I thought about it, the air felt thinner. When I got back to Tessa's apartment, she was sitting cross-legged on the couch with her laptop balanced on her knees. "You look like someone just ran over your dog," she said softly. I handed her my phone, where I'd already pulled up the same image. "Look," she studied it, frowning. "That's your dad, right?" "Yes. The meeting was in Dallas, 3 days before I got home." Her brow furrowed. "So they didn't move suddenly." "No, they lied." The word sat heavy between us. Lied. It felt childish and enormous at the same time. I sat down beside her, my legs trembling. "They planned it, Tess. They looked me in the eyes over video calls, asked about finals, told me they missed me, and all the while, they were packing. They just didn't tell me because they didn't want to deal with the fallout." Tessa's expression softened. That's cruel." "It's calculated," I corrected. "They waited until the exact moment they knew I'd be gone. They made sure I couldn't stop them." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly, the rhythmic hum filling the room. I kept hearing my mother's voice from that call, her calm, practiced detachment. "You'll figure it out." We had to move fast. Except they hadn't. They hadn't moved fast at all. They'd been deliberate, precise. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through my contacts. My thumb hovered over my mother's name for a long time before I finally pressed call. The line rang twice before she answered. "Emily?" Her voice was groggy, surprised. "Is something wrong?" "Yeah," I said, my voice low but steady. "Something's wrong." There was a pause. "What are you talking about?" I took a breath. "Dad was at a community meeting in Dallas 3 days before I came home. I saw the photo, so tell me the truth. You didn't have to sell the house quickly. You planned it. You lied to me." The silence that followed stretched so long, I thought she might hang up. When she finally spoke, her tone was flat. "Emily, what difference does it make? The result's the same." "The difference," I said, my voice breaking despite my effort to hold it together, "is that you could have told me. You could have given me time to find somewhere to go. You didn't just forget me. You chose to." Her sigh came through the speaker, sharp and dismissive. "Oh, stop being dramatic. You always overthink everything. We knew you'd land on your feet. You always do." "You didn't think about how it would feel, did you?" I said quietly. "I thought about what's best for us," she snapped. "You're grown. You should be thanking us for pushing you to be independent. You've been coddled long enough." I felt heat flood my face. "Thank you? You want me to thank you for making me homeless?" Her tone turned almost mocking. "We didn't make you homeless. We gave you a chance to start your own life. You're welcome, Emily." My fingers tightened around the phone. "You didn't give me anything. You took everything away. You took my home, my security, my sense of belonging, and turned you into an adult," she interrupted. "You're angry now, but someday you'll see this was the right thing." I went quiet then, not because I agreed, but because I realized something profound. There was nothing I could say that would matter. My words couldn't penetrate whatever armor she'd built around her choices. I could shout until my lungs gave out, and she'd still hear only what fit her version of the story. Finally, I said, "You know what? You're right. This was the right thing. Because now I understand exactly who you are." Her voice sharpened. "What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done. You wanted me to be independent? Congratulations, you got what you wanted." And then I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the phone. I stared at the screen, her name still visible, glowing faintly. Then I did what I should have done months ago. I blocked her number, then my father's, then my aunt's. One by one, I erased every connection that linked me back to them. Tessa woke to the sound of me pacing the living room. "What happened?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "They planned it," I said simply. "All of it. And they're proud of it." She blinked, processing the words. Then she got up, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and said the only thing that could have made sense in that moment. "Then they don't deserve you." I sat on the couch, the blanket heavy and warm, the adrenaline fading to exhaustion. I should have felt empty. Instead, there was clarity, a cold, sharp understanding that sometimes the only way to survive is to stop waiting for people to explain why they broke you. Outside, Dawn was just starting to color the horizon. I watched the light spread slowly across the window, turning the glass gold. For the first time in months, I wasn't hoping for an apology or a reason. For the first time, I was done. There is something strange about starting over. It's quiet, almost sterile, like standing in a room where everything echoes because there's nothing left to absorb the sound. That was how my life felt in the months after I hung up on my mother for the last time. The silence between us wasn't a wound anymore. It was a boundary, one I needed in order to rebuild from the ruins they left behind. I didn't make any grand declarations or promises to myself. I just worked. I worked because work gave me something solid to hold on to. I spent the early mornings at the cafe with Tessa, opening shop before the sun came up, and the rest of my hours buried in my laptop. I started taking small freelance contracts, basic cybersecurity consultations for local businesses, a password audit here, a security assessment there. Most of it was mundane, but it paid, and more importantly, it reminded me who I was, the girl who had plans, skills, and discipline. The girl who wasn't defined by anyone else's decisions. Money came slowly at first, trickling in through digital transfers that barely covered my half of the rent. But I kept going. Each new client meant another step away from dependence, another reminder that I could build something from nothing. Tessa would joke that I was married to the keyboard, but she understood. Every keystroke was a declaration. I'm still here. I survived you. 3 months after the last call with my mother, I moved out of Tessa's apartment. It wasn't because I wanted to leave her. I owed her more than she'd ever know, but because I needed to stand on my own. The studio I found in Houston was tiny, barely more than a box with a window, but when I walked in, I felt something shift inside me. The walls were blank, the floors scuffed, the air faintly smelled of dust and paint. It was nothing special, but it was mine. No one could sell it from under me or decide I didn't belong there. I bought a secondhand bed from Craigslist, a rickety desk from a thrift store, and a chair with a rip down the back. My laptop sat in the center of the desk like an anchor. I remember standing in the middle of that empty space, my belongings piled in 2 small boxes, and whispering aloud, "This is enough." It wasn't a home yet, but it was a start. Those first weeks alone were strange. Some nights the silence pressed against me until I had to fill it with music or the murmur of a podcast. Other nights, I embraced it, letting the quiet stretch until it felt peaceful instead of lonely. I learned the rhythm of the city outside my window, the soft whir of cars on wet pavement, the occasional siren in the distance, the stray cat that yowled under the streetlight at midnight. It all became familiar, a kind of white noise that told me I wasn't as isolated as I felt. When I wasn't working for clients, I studied. I applied for scholarships, signed up for advanced certification courses, and spent long nights at my desk surrounded by empty mugs and half-eaten takeout. My advisor at Columbia, Professor Davis, noticed the shift in my performance. He called one afternoon and said, "Emily, you're working at a graduate level. Have you considered accelerating your degree?" I almost laughed. A year ago, I would have panicked at the idea. But now, the challenge felt like purpose. "How early could I finish?" I asked. "If you take summer courses and overload next semester, you could graduate by December." That night, I spread out my planner and mapped it all out. 6 courses per semester, full-time freelance work on the side, no breaks, no distractions. It sounded impossible, but impossibility didn't scare me anymore. I'd already survived the worst thing I could imagine. Everything else was just logistics. Days bled into weeks. I built a routine around my work and studies, my life orbiting the small desk by the window. My world had narrowed to code and deadlines, but it felt strangely freeing. Each completed project, each passed exam added another layer to the armor I was forging for myself. Still, there were moments when the past tried to intrude. Sometimes, when exhaustion blurred the edges of my focus, I'd catch myself glancing at the photo tucked inside my desk drawer, the one Tessa told me to keep. My parents and me laughing under that Texas sun. I didn't look at it to mourn anymore. I looked to remind myself that I had been loved once, even if imperfectly. It kept me from turning into someone bitter. On weekends, I volunteered at a women's shelter downtown. It started as a favor to one of my freelance clients who ran a local nonprofit. They needed help securing their Wi-Fi network, But I stayed because of what I found there: people who were trying to rebuild too. Some had left abusive relationships, others were escaping debt or illness or homelessness. Their stories mirrored mine in ways I didn't expect. I taught basic cybersecurity workshops, showing them how to protect their online accounts, how to recognize scams, how to create digital safety after losing everything. Each time one of them said thank you, I felt something soften inside me. Healing, I realized, wasn't just about forgetting what hurt you. It was about transforming it into something that could help someone else. One evening, after I finished a class at the shelter, I walked back to my studio as the sky burned pink and orange. I stopped at a food truck, ordered tacos, and sat on the curb eating alone. I thought about how just months earlier, I'd been sitting on another curb, surrounded by boxes and confusion. Back then, I'd felt like my life had ended. Now, sitting there with salsa dripping down my fingers, I realized it had only just begun. A few weeks later, I got an email from Nexora Labs, the cybersecurity firm I dreamed of working for since my first year at Columbia. They wanted to interview me for a summer internship. I stared at the message so long, the text went blurry. When I finally called Tessa to tell her, she screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I told you," she said, laughing. "You turned all that pain into power." Her words lingered with me. Pain into power. Maybe that was what rebuilding really meant. Not erasing what had been broken, but using the fragments to build something unbreakable. The interview came and went, and by the end of the week, I got the offer. A small part of me wished I could tell my parents, not for their approval, but because it would have been something we once celebrated together. But I didn't send the email draft I wrote that night. I deleted it instead. Some bridges don't need to be rebuilt. Some silences deserve to stay that way. As summer turned to fall, I moved through my days with a kind of steady determination I hadn't known before. My apartment slowly transformed. A plant on the windowsill, postcards from places I wanted to visit, a corkboard filled with reminders and goals. It wasn't about making the space beautiful. It was about claiming it, piece by piece. One night, as rain pattered against the window, I caught my reflection in the glass. I looked older, sharper somehow. The version of me who had once stood crying on a driveway no longer existed. In her place was someone new. Someone who had learned that survival isn't about revenge or resentment. It's about reconstruction. It's about saying, "You didn't destroy me. You just forced me to evolve." That was the night I knew I had finally rebuilt something stronger than a home. I had rebuilt myself. It was late on a Wednesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a notification that would unravel everything I thought I'd finally put to rest. I was sitting in the corner of my tiny Houston apartment, the one with the single window that overlooked a narrow alley. The room smelled faintly of coffee and rain. I'd just finished submitting a project for Nexora Labs, a trial assignment they'd given me before my internship officially started, and I was letting myself breathe for the first time all week. The message appeared in the corner of my screen like a ghost from another life. Message request: Patricia Carter, my mother's name. For a long time, I didn't move. My hand hovered over the mouse as my heartbeat thudded slow and deep in my chest. I'd blocked her months ago, deleted her contact information, scrubbed every trace of her number from my phone. But technology had a way of finding loopholes. A new account, a different platform, the same handwriting of her words on the screen. "Emily, please. I know you're angry, but we need your help. You're the only one who can fix this." I stared at the message, my mind a storm of disbelief and something dangerously close to curiosity. They needed me. After everything. After abandoning me, erasing me, and pretending I didn't exist, they were asking for help. I leaned back in my chair and let out a hollow laugh. "Unbelievable," I muttered to the empty room. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice in my head, the same calm, condescending tone she'd used the last time we spoke. "You'll thank us someday. This will make you stronger." And here she was, months later, reaching out like none of it had happened. By morning, I still hadn't replied. Instead, I forwarded a screenshot of the message to Tessa with no explanation, just a single question mark. Her response came almost instantly. "Oh no. Don't even think about it. Block her again." I wanted to agree. I wanted to hit block and erase the message from my inbox like it had never existed. But I didn't. because something about her words, "You're the only one who can fix this," made me uneasy. My mother wasn't the type to admit need, not even when the walls were burning down around her. If she'd reached out, it meant something had gone terribly wrong. And despite everything, a small, treacherous part of me wanted to know what. So instead of replying, I did what I'd trained myself to do best. I investigated. The first step was simple: open source research. I typed my parents' names, Mark and Patricia Carter, Tampa, Florida, into every search bar I could find. For a long time, there was nothing beyond public property records and the occasional community bulletin. They'd bought a luxury condo 6 months earlier, the same one my mother had bragged about during that last phone call. There were photos on the condo association's website: palm trees, manicured lawns, retirees smiling in pastel polos. But then, buried deep in local news archives, I found it: Tampa couple under investigation for investment fraud. My stomach dropped. The article was brief but damning. A man named Mark Carter accused of orchestrating a Ponzi-style investment scheme, promising high returns to elderly residents. The report mentioned his wife Patricia, though she wasn't formally charged. The victims had lost thousands. I scrolled until my hands began to tremble. My father's mugshot stared back at me: gray hair, hollow eyes, the same face that used to smile from across our kitchen table. It all clicked then. The fresh start in Florida, the sudden sale of the house, the obsession with quick money. They hadn't left me behind because they needed a new life. They'd left me behind because they needed to hide. I sat there for a long time, staring at the glowing screen. A part of me wanted to feel anger again, that white-hot fury that used to consume me. But I didn't. What I felt instead was clarity, icy and absolute. They hadn't changed. They'd only sunk deeper into the version of themselves I'd refused to see before. Tessa called that evening after her shift at the cafe. I told her everything. She went quiet for a moment and then said, "You know what this means, right? She's not reaching out because she's sorry. She's reaching out because she's desperate." "I know," I said, "but desperate people are dangerous. I need to know how bad it is." Over the next few days, I dug deeper. My skills, the same ones they used to brag about to their friends, "Our daughter's a computer genius," became the tools I used to dismantle their secrets. I found traces of offshore accounts, shell corporations with their initials hidden in plain sight, and transaction logs that told the story better than any apology ever could. They'd built an empire out of lies, and when it crumbled, they remembered the daughter who could make problems disappear. I imagined the conversation they must have had before my mother sent that message. "Emily can help us. She's smart. She owes us that much." The thought made my stomach stick. I didn't owe them anything. That night, I drafted a reply. It took me an hour to write one sentence. "I'm sorry to hear you're having difficulties. Unfortunately, I'm busy with work. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always said I should be more independent. Maybe it's time you took your own advice." I read it 3 times, my finger hovering over the send button. Then I pressed it. The moment the message sent, a strange calm settled over me. There would be no more explanations, no more apologies, no more giving them the power to hurt me again. I blocked the account, closed my laptop, and turned off my phone. But it wasn't over. Over the next week, I started getting calls from unknown numbers, then emails, then messages from names I didn't recognize, but whose words felt eerily familiar. "Emily, please. We just need a little help." One even came from my Aunt Carol, the same one who'd once told me to be patient with your mother. They were reaching through every possible crack in my defenses. I ignored them all. Instead, I threw myself into work. Nexora had officially confirmed my internship, and I wasn't about to let their chaos drag me under again. Still, their shadows lingered. Each time my phone buzzed, my body tensed. Every knock on my door made me wonder if they'd found another way to reach me. I started double-locking the door, leaving the lights on when I worked late. It wasn't fear exactly. It was vigilance. The kind you learn when you realize that the people who hurt you once will always try to rewrite the story when they need something. One afternoon, as I was leaving the library, Tessa met me outside with 2 iced coffees. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said, handing me one. "I haven't," I admitted. "They're trying to get through to me again. It's like they can't stand the idea of me not answering." She tilted her head. "That's because you stopped playing your role. They don't know who they are without someone to manipulate. Her words landed like truth often does, sharp and undeniable. That night, I deleted every email that had come through since my mother's message. I wiped my inbox clean. I even printed the photo of their mugshots and tucked it into a folder labeled proof. It wasn't about revenge, it was about control. Evidence meant clarity, and clarity meant peace. Before I shut my laptop, I opened one last blank document and typed a single sentence. They made their choice. Now I'm making mine. I didn't know that the next time my phone rang from an unknown number, it wouldn't be them. It would be the FBI. But for that moment, before the storm broke again, I allowed myself to believe that I'd finally won, that the ghosts were gone, that the story had ended where it should have, with me choosing silence over chaos. And maybe, in a way, it had. Because by refusing to save them, I had finally saved myself. The knock came just as I was locking my apartment door on my way to class. 3 short raps, measured, authoritative. I turned, my hand tightening instinctively around the strap of my bag. A woman stood in the narrow hallway, tall, composed, wearing a dark suit that didn't belong to Houston's humidity. She held out a badge before I could speak. "Emily Carter?" she asked. My stomach tightened. Yes, she gave a polite nod, though her expression stayed unreadable. "I'm Agent Rivera, FBI. We need to talk about your parents." For a heartbeat, I thought she was joking. My brain refused to connect the words FBI and parents into a sentence that made sense. But the badge was real, and so was the faint hum of tension in her voice. I stepped aside numbly, gesturing for her to enter. The apartment suddenly felt too small, the air too still. I motioned to the only chair while I sat on the edge of the bed. My heart was thudding against my ribs like a warning drum. She took out a folder, flipping through several pages before looking up. "Your parents, Mark and Patricia Carter, were arrested 3 days ago in Tampa. Federal wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. They've been cooperating, but they've also made several claims that directly involve you." My mouth went dry. "Involve me how?" "They've told investigators that you assisted them in managing their financial accounts," she said carefully. "They claim you had access to offshore data, encryption tools, and digital wallets used to conceal funds. They presented evidence of communication logs and some technical documentation that references your name." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the world narrowing to the low hum of the refrigerator. "They're lying," I finally said. "I haven't spoken to them since last year. I blocked every number they have." Agent Rivera studied me closely, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "We believe that may be the case," she said, "but we need your cooperation to verify it. Do you have any records of communication, or lack thereof, since their move to Florida?" I stood, moving automatically toward my desk. The motions were mechanical, the kind I'd practiced in 100 security audits. "I keep everything," I said. "Timestamps, call logs, even the message they sent me months ago. I can prove I never replied after that." For the next 2 hours, we combed through my digital life, my laptop, my phone, my archived backups. I showed her everything, the message requests, the screenshots, the paper trail of silence. My heartbeat steadied as I spoke. This was the one battlefield I knew how to navigate. Proof, logic, data. I watched as she took notes, occasionally glancing at me as if reassessing the story she'd been told. When she finally closed her folder, her tone softened. "You've done a remarkable job documenting everything. This will help immensely. Can I ask what happens now?" "They'll face trial," she said. "Your evidence will support our case, and it also clears you of any involvement." She hesitated, then added quietly, "You should know they've been telling people you refused to help them, that you abandoned them." I almost laughed, but the sound came out brittle. "That's one thing they're finally telling the truth about." After she left, I sat in the silence she'd left behind, staring at the empty doorway. I should have felt relief, but what I felt instead was a hollow ache. My parents had gone from abandoning me to trying to frame me, and somehow I wasn't even surprised. Their betrayal had evolved, but the pattern was the same. Use me, discard me, repeat. That night, I pulled my laptop toward me and opened a blank document. The glow of the screen bathed the room in pale light. I started typing, not for school, not for work, but because I needed to put something into words that data couldn't contain. I wrote about the day they left, about the boxes on the driveway, the note on the door, the slow unraveling of everything I believed in. I wrote until my fingers cramped and my eyes blurred. When I finally stopped, I realized I wasn't writing for them. I was writing for me. The trial came months later. I wasn't required to attend, but I did. I sat in the back row of the courtroom in Tampa, far enough that they didn't see me when they were led in wearing orange jumpsuits. My father looked older, thinner. My mother's hair had gone completely gray. She scanned the room once, her eyes sweeping past me without recognition, and for a brief moment I saw not malice, but exhaustion. The prosecutor's voice was steady as she outlined their crimes: the forged documents, the fabricated investments, the millions siphoned from retirees who trusted them. When she mentioned my name, my chest tightened, but only for a moment. I knew what the evidence said. I knew who I was. When the judge handed down their sentence, 15 years in federal prison, I didn't flinch. There was no vindication, no cinematic wave of triumph, just quiet understanding. Justice didn't heal, it simply balanced the scale. Afterward, I walked outside into the blinding Florida sun. The air smelled of salt and asphalt. For a long while, I stood on the courthouse steps and let the light hit my face, as if it could burn away the residue of the last 2 years. That night, I flew back to Texas. By the time summer rolled around, my internship with Nexora Labs had turned into a full-time offer. I graduated early in December, walking across the small campus auditorium stage while Tessa cheered from the back row, waving a bouquet of wildflowers. When they handed me my diploma, I felt something unfamiliar: peace, pure and unadulterated. Later that evening, as the city lights of Houston shimmered outside my window, I sat at my desk and looked around my apartment. The walls were covered with pieces of my new life: a framed certificate from Nexora, a photo of Tessa and me at the cafe, a small potted plant I'd managed to keep alive for 6 months. Nothing about it was extraordinary, but everything about it was mine. Sometimes, when I thought about my parents, the memories still came in flashes, their laughter echoing through our old house, my mother's voice calling me for dinner, my father's terrible singing in the car. I no longer tried to suppress those moments. They were part of me, the same way the scars on my palms were part of my hands. But they didn't define me anymore. On the day I moved to San Francisco for my new job, I took one last detour. My flight was that evening, but something pulled me back to Austin, to the quiet street where my childhood had ended. The house looked different now. Someone had repainted it a warm cream color, and a swing hung from the oak tree out front. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of a family, 2 parents and a small child chasing a golden retriever across the living room. Laughter spilled out when the door opened. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, the heat pressing against my skin. I thought about how much I'd wanted that laughter back once, how hard I'd tried to chase something that no longer existed. Then, quietly, I whispered, "You didn't destroy me. You freed me." The words surprised me, not because they were dramatic, but because they felt true. My parents' betrayal had broken the version of me that needed them. In the ruins of that girl, I'd built someone else, someone who didn't wait to be chosen, who didn't define herself by the love she lost. When I boarded my flight that night, the city glittered beneath me like a circuit board. I watched until the lights blurred into one continuous glow. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been: the daughter, the victim, the survivor, and realized I'd finally reached the last one: the creator, the builder of her own life. Redemption, I realized, isn't about forgiveness. It's about reclamation. It's about taking back every piece of yourself that someone else tried to own. As the plane sliced through the clouds, I opened my journal and wrote one final line: "They took my home, my safety, and my trust. But they never took my future." This time, the silence around me wasn't empty. It was full of freedom, of strength, of the sound of a life finally, truly beginning. When Emily Carter returned from university, she believed she was coming home to warmth, familiarity, and family. Instead, she found a driveway full of boxes and a note that shattered everything she knew. We had to move fast. Handle it yourself. From that moment, her life split into 2 versions: the one that had depended on others for safety and the one that had to build safety from scratch. What began as heartbreak became transformation. She lost her parents not to death, but to betrayal. Yet through that loss, she discovered a deeper truth. Strength isn't born from being protected, it's born from being forced to protect yourself. In the years that followed, Emily's pain became her foundation. She rebuilt her life from nothing, working long hours, sleeping on a couch, and piecing together her dignity one day at a time. She refused to let bitterness define her. When her parents resurfaced, broken, desperate, and facing the consequences of their greed, she didn't seek revenge. She chose clarity. She chose freedom. By the time they were gone for good, she had become everything they never believed she could be: independent, capable, and whole. Emily's story reminds us that family doesn't always mean love, and love doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes, losing everything you thought you needed is the only way to realize you've had the power to create your own life all along. In a world where people will disappoint you, your truest redemption is self-respect and the courage to keep moving forward even when you must walk alone. Now, let me ask you something. If you were in Emily's place, what would you do? A. Forgive your parents and try to help them. B. Cut ties and protect the peace you fought to rebuild. Comment your answer, A or B, below. What about you? What lesson did you take from Emily's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can learn from each other. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and follow the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.